I'd like to show you the Hope threading jig. This is the box set which is available. It comes complete. It has the hinge plate, the cutter, and it comes with either two spindles, 16 TPI and 12 TPI, or you can also just purchase with one spindle and maybe purchase this part later. Also available is a drawbar system, 2 Morse taper, if you don't have any other means of holding the cutter. The cutter is high speed steel. This part is parallel, and you can hold in Jacob's chuck or with pin jaws, so you don't have to buy this if you already have those options. So I'll just move this part out of the way. I will use my 8mm tool to take the inside out. I prefer to start from to do the inside. I find this is easier to make the box work. So this would be the inside of the lid. It's very important to make this part parallel for the threads, and to do that I will use my detail tool. This is a round bar which is shaped like a parting tool, and this allows me to cut a nice parallel side. When I'm cutting, what I do is look down at the bar and also to the bed bars to make sure that it is cutting parallel. And then I can use the other side, which is a small skew I like to use to tidy, and also to place a chamfer on here. And this is ready to start cutting the threads after I have placed some super glue. I like to use thin, and I use this to harden the timber, and it just makes the thread stronger. So I place some thin, and just use some tissue to wipe around. And then I activate. So you must keep the piece in the chuck, and this comes off of the lathe and will go on to the threading jig. There are different stems available: 30mm, 1 inch, 19mm and 16mm. When I first set the jig up, I use the tail stock, and there is a small hole in the end here, and we can use this to centralize so that it's on the center line. And then I use this collar, so each time it is set, so you don't have to do that again. So before I start cutting, I always make sure I have a gap here, and I have a gap on this part. This clicks the body in and out so we can get our depth of cut. And I'll talk about this when we actually start doing it. But to begin with, we need a gap here and a gap here. I'm going to use the cutter holder with the drawbar. Just locate that into the end. So when I'm actually doing the cutting, the speed will be around about 3000 RPM. It cuts a much cleaner cut the faster that is going. What we have to do now is set up in position before we start the cutting. What I do is just move the cutter on the inside edge, and then you need to look down. I use the chuck with the bed bars to make sure that it's parallel. So we just move into position and make sure everything's locked down. That way we can then move these parts clear, and that's why we have a gap here and here to begin with, so we can start the cutting process. Now I'll show you how to actually start cutting. What we need to do to begin with is to actually get the cutter so it's just touching the wood, and this is what I call the kiss test. So we'll run the speed, and then slowly I have one click, and I can hear that it's just touching the outside and starting to cut. So this is the 0 position. For 16 TPI we need to have 5 clicks. The click system is built into the handle, so you can hear and feel how many clicks to push forward. So to begin with, I like to do most of the depth, so I should do 4 clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I should make my cut. There is no need to have a groove in the back because we have a depth stop available. So each time it will always stop at the right position. And built in is this hinge plate, and this allows to bring the workpiece away from the cutter, and we can check and we can add some more glue if we need to. I normally add some more super glue at this stage. Now that we've started to cut the threads, it's nice to harden with some more super glue and then do one more click to do the finishing cut. So I'm just going to blow the dust out. Just carefully run some more thin glue into the threads to harden. This makes it much stronger. And I shall just activate also. So with the hinge plate, it drops exactly in the correct position. We need one more click because 5 was the total number needed. So one more click, and this is the nice finishing cut. And just take it nice and steady, under control, and we can keep going until we feel it hits the depth stop, like so. And another little trick is I always hold the piece of work with my left hand, so when I'm coming back I just put a little bit of back pressure with my fingers and it takes the cutter away from the timber. So here, small pressure and bring the cutter back. And this is the female thread cut. And I'll now set up a new piece of wood to cut the male thread. Now I'd like to show you how I would make the male thread. First we need to tidy up from the parting marks on the timber. I use some metal digital verniers to get the offset. Now for 16 TPI the offset is 1.2 millimeter, and for the 12 TPI it's 1.9 millimeter. But all the information is in the instructions. So what we do is we use the metal verniers and we take the measurement of the threads and carefully we take this out, and then very simple I press 0 and then add 1.2 millimeter, like so, 1.22, that's fine. And then I use this to mark for the sizing. Now it's very important to make sure that this point here does not touch the timber, otherwise this can flick up, but this is just a very quick way of making a mark of the correct size. So I shall use my parting tool. I always put a small chamfer on here, and I use a thin parting tool to create a gap at the back. Should make sure that this is parallel. Again, I just use the bed bars and just look down to make sure this is parallel. And I shall check the size is correct. I wait till the lathe is stopped to do this. Okay, so it's just a little bit tight. Take just a little bit more off. Good, correct size. And now I shall use some thin cyanacrylate glue just to soak in and harden the timber. On hardwoods I would not need to do this. I use it on the softer timbers to make the wood and the thread stronger. So we shall take this out, mount it into the threading device. We need to just move the depth stop back. That was still set for when we done the internal. And again, nice and gently, I take it up to where it's just touching the wood. Make sure you have the gap and a gap. And I look down at the chuck and make sure that it's parallel. So just look down, slight movement, yeah. And make sure everything's locked. And now we can bring this back and bring this back, and we can now position to get the 0 kiss test. So now we need to do what I call the kiss test again, and that is to get the cutter so it's just touching the outside of the wood. So here is not touching, so I move in. Not touching. One more. Yeah, now it's touching. So this is now 0, which is the kiss test. So this is 16 TPI. We need to make 5 clicks, but to begin with I make 4 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can make my cut. Again, we can stop here and we can use this as our stop. And we can also use the hinge plate to come away from the cutter and add some more super glue to make it stronger. Again, I only use the super glue on really soft timbers, on timbers like rosewood or boxwood. Harder timbers, you would not need to use the super glue. But the advantage of this jig is that you can cut some really nice threads in some cheaper, softer timbers just with the aid of some thin super glue. So we activate, back exactly the same position, release the handle, one more click. So the other good thing about the hinge plate, again we can move everything out the way to test for our thread, which we now have. Now if this was too tight, and sometimes it may be too tight, I will show you a trick how to adjust. So if it was too tight and you needed to take some more, what I would do is you could use some abrasive, hold on the flats, then take down and you can do one more click. And this is how you can adjust to make a correct fit. I would now just like to make a small clip just to show you how to match the grain up. You have to do this by taking from the female side of the box, and I'll demonstrate by just using a pencil line. So with the box fitted, here is a line, and we want this line to match with this line. Okay, and I will now demonstrate. What we just simply do is just take a small amount from this face so that it moves round. But it's quite surprising how small you have to take off to make it move round. I like to use my detail tool. So very small amount. It was here and now is here, so very small, just a little bit more. Perfect. I would now like to just show you how the threading jig assembles from the box. The body is already complete onto the hinge plate, but you need to make your stem screw into the base. I have 1 inch available, and I also have 30mm available, 16mm and 19mm to suit your lathe. So this goes in like so, and I swing round so it's tight, and I use the small Allen key in here to lock this spindle. So to add the spindle into the threading jig, it just slides in, and you locate the flat, which is on here, to the grub screw. And what I do is just wobble it slightly until you feel it bite into the flat. It is very important that you don't over tighten this, so just pinch tight. The stopper has a brass tipped grub screw. This just slides on, and you can put your handle in with the grub screw. And again, to adjust, this comes off, and you can just swap over to a different size spindle. This one is the 16 TPI. and the hinge plate just operates just with this lever. You're now ready to make some threads.